And good morning, ladies.
Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning, Charlie.
Good
morning. Oh my God, I missed you. I missed these beautiful smiles. It's been so long. We haven't been in contact for so many years. And while you ladies have been busy, I'm really thrilled and amazed by your scientific achievements. Well done on all your discoveries, and in particular that patent on mitochondrial regulation by microRNA. How do you call them, Alex?
The mitomeres. The mitochondrial microRNAs. Yeah, that was an exciting findings that other teams also discovered after. So it is nice, and it's moving on. Thank you.
What about you, Judy?
Well, I guess the biggest splash is the discovery and characterization and isolation of the XMRVs, the mouse viruses that entered humans by way of its infection by injection. And we're seeing the explosion here called COVID-19 to cover up the diseases associated with those mouse retroviruses.
Well done. And what about you, Dolores?
I suppose mine would have been the patenting and development of high content protein and antibody arrays. And from a tiny amount of blood, Charlie, you can diagnose profiles associated with autoimmune disease, to diagnose them early, or cancer, and to test the specificity and cross-reactivity of antibodies. And this is kind of important at the minute, because for COVID-19, you can test how specific are the tests that are being used by a lot of industry and governments to shut down the world at the minute. So that's what I've been doing, Charlie.
Wow, congratulations, girls. I've always known you were amazing, stunning, and while you're doing an amazing work. Now you probably understand why we all got together on this Zoom, did you?
Yeah,
So,
COVID. COVID brings everyone together or apart.
That is a very, very strong point you're making here. So glad you're reminding us. Once again, you've been brilliant. Ladies, you've been very, very busy out there in the online world. You've been speaking to the world. What platform have you been using? Where can people find you?
Well, people can find me essentially anywhere. Plaguethebook.com. Our movie, a billion people have seen the movie Plandemic. Our New York Times bestseller, Plague of Corruption. Our new book, The Case Against the Masks. Yeah, you can pretty well find me anywhere in the world.
Alexandra?
Well, I'm not me, Charlie. I'm not fond of being public and going public, for instance, unless it is science, and I love scientific meetings. But beside that, so I was not very structured, and I went through different channels named Thana TV, THANA TV. Then the other ones, that was like last May 1st. Then I went on TVL, then I was on Planet 360 Degrees. Basically every sort of channel that are not mainstream, because those guys wouldn't let me speak. Sorry, Charlie.
I understand. We understand. It's the days we're going through. And what about you, Dolores?
So I wasn't really on social media at all up until about a few months ago, really. But now you can find me on, I'm working with the founders of Brand New Tube, and Dr. Vernon Coleman is there, and I have a channel, Dolores Cahill. You can also find me at dolorescahill.com, and I'm building a movement, we might talk about it later, called the Custodian Movement. So I have custodian.com as well. So dolorescahill.com, custodian.com, and I'm chair of Irish Freedom. And that's, Charlie, I have been trying to inspire people to set up freedom parties. So I'm also chair of the Irish Freedom Party, so irishfreedom.ie. And I'm working with a lot of people across Ireland on the platform.ie to try and share knowledge to try and build a better world in Ireland. So the platform.ie as well.
Beautiful. I'm so glad that the world can find you, even when some members of the world are trying to hide you. I'm so lucky to have you right here in front of me. We have a mission here today to understand. I've been really confused myself. I'm just I may be Charles, but I'm a human being and I have to go around in the streets. And recently I was in France and I've seen lots of very confusing things. I think the most confusing for me was in the streets of Paris, where, you know, they're supposed to keep all this distance and wear your mask. And then I walked by a testing center and there's like 30 people stacked against each other, hurrying up to go get a COVID test.
It's a clever virus, Charlie.
It's a virus that we never encounter. A virus that suddenly is becoming very dangerous at night. For instance, in France, it's starting early as like 9 p.m. 9 p.m. is like the worst that can happen to you between 9 p.m. and 6 p.m. But 6 a.m. But fortunately enough, in Germany, the virus is not behaving the same, and in Belgium, not the same. So they only come out, the virus comes out only at night, starting at midnight. See, it's a very peculiar thing.
And maybe, Alex, I should tell you that I was in Berlin, you know, Dr. Heiko Schöning, about 10 days ago. And when you're sitting in a restaurant in Berlin, you're fine. But if you stand up, then the virus gets activated in the restaurant.
Yes, this is due to gravity. This is due to the gravity. So when you speak, the virus comes out of your mouth, then drops to the ground, but like get sort of being elevated from the table, and so doesn't go right onto the table. It's very convenient. Those are very new viruses.
But also, I think it's a virus who likes short people, but not tall people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
If you stand up, it's very effective. But if you're quite short or you're sitting down, it's okay.
Yeah. And also, did you notice that was very strange to me, is that the virus doesn't, it likes food, so it likes restaurant, it likes alcohol, so it likes bars, but it doesn't like tea rooms. It doesn't like tea because tea rooms are fine. So it's very, very peculiar. I mean, I think we need Judy's light on the behavior of this virus. Judy, please help us.
Yes, I wish I could. Here in Los Angeles, the virus now knows in between bites, you have to pull your mask down, because in between bites of food, the virus is activating and the inflammation, the flame, it's like throwing gasoline on the virus, and it runs through your mask and everything else. So yes, this is the most amazing virus I think I've ever worked with. It behaves like no other virus. And in fact, I haven't worked with it because it doesn't exist. Nobody's actually isolated it and sequenced the actual virus that is doing all these things. It's so elusive that it has eluded all of the scientists attempting to do the isolation.
And Judy, is it right that in the original paper that they actually took the sequence from social media? Is that true?
Well, pretty well close to social media. So they actually, when they amplify in that testing center and they put that swab way up in your brain, that Q-tip that's contaminated with God only knows what, all the way up in your brain, and they swab it and they come out and they say, look, you have a piece of the virus, and then the piece of the virus, the blueprint, you know, there's no particle, there's no protein, there's no antibodies.
And people don't have to have symptoms, you know.
They're healthy.
That you only know you have it from this test, but you actually don't have any symptoms or illness. That's an unusual virus, right, Judy?
Oh, absolutely unusual virus that you're a case with only symptom. And somehow this virus knows from the 8% of your genome that are other viruses that are just dormant and sleeping and also not causing any symptoms because they don't make virus particles. They're not infectious and transmissible. Just like this virus has never been shown to be infectious and transmissible.
But I have a question, because in France, Didier Raoult has been putting a number of sequences of this SARS-CoV-2 and even, you know, reporting some mutants. So I'm quite puzzled with what you're saying, and as well as the symptoms, they were all sort of similar. Let's say that you have this flu-like form of the COVID, then you have this some kind of neurologic type of the COVID disease, and you have the thrombotic type of the disease. So you have at least 3 patterns of common reproductive diseases that we have identified and seen in France.
Yes, there are symptoms associated, the flu-like symptoms, the neurologic symptoms. Oh, and we even hear there's a long haul COVID, and that looks exactly like myalgic encephalomyelitis or CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. And this is the diseases that have been associated with lots of viruses that are silent in our bodies, including those mouse retroviruses that actually do have asymptomatic carriers and do sit in reservoirs in your body. Coronaviruses don't do that. Coronaviruses are cleared. And the Chinese, Dr. Yan, showed a paper showing there are hundreds, if not dozens, of different kinds of viruses from those bats. And in those very cultures are the mouse viruses, this friend virus, the spleen focus forming virus, the at least 5 different, even VP62, even the synthetic XMRV infectious molecular clone, just as we're making. So yes, the sequences are there, but they're not viruses. People aren't showing us the particles we see on the screen with the spike proteins. Those all come out of animal cells. They don't come out of humans with any kind of disease. This is what the big lie really is for all of us.
Maybe Alex, just to say that I was working with some, scientists that would be experts on the virus and trying to find patient samples, to do analysis. And what's very interesting all around the world is that the patient samples, the blood samples, were being destroyed. So when these 2 very, very well-known scientists contacted me in May, I said, well, maybe you'll get the samples in a year, because it is quite tricky now to get samples, especially in Europe. But they said, oh no, we'll get samples in the UK or in America. And they tried all over the world. And the samples from COVID-19 patients are being destroyed, which never happens, So and a lot of the time they're not doing autopsies on the patients all over the world. So there is these new protocols being brought in with this disease and this virus that makes it very difficult for us to actually study the people who get the symptoms and that are written down as COVID-19, deaths from COVID-19.
Yeah, that's a very clear thing, because they keep on saying died from COVID. But one wonders, because of this variety of symptoms, how can they be sure that they died from COVID? Because obviously you have to perform an autopsy to be sure that it is a death from COVID. So I was a bit puzzled with that. And to go back to Judy's point, in my lab, we have been putting the conditions together to do this PCR testing thing. And so indeed, it is assessing the presence of the RNA sequence of SARS-CoV-2. So how can you say that we haven't been seeing? I understand that you're talking of the envelope, and to say that, if one virus is contagious, it has to have the envelope and to go and be get replicated in your cells. That I understand, but you still have those PCR positive that I cannot reconcile with what you're saying.
The PCR test only measures 10% of the virus, if that.
Correct.
regions, as we know, in very small pieces. So
Correct.
what was shown in the paper by Dr. Yan, the Chinese paper just last week, is that these sequences, they have to actually do the genome walking techniques. They have to synthesize the rest of the virus in the laboratory. And this is the problem because, in fact, we aren't seeing the particles that are shown on the pictures. We aren't seeing the particles in the patients. And really, COVID-19 means disease. See, coronavirus, let's just say coronavirus infectious disease or coronavirus disease. So the disease clearly doesn't satisfy Koch's postulates for having SARS-CoV-2 or any other single coronavirus being the causative agent. So it hasn't been isolated from sick people. So if you're a causative agent, every person with evidence of the virus, meaning that PCR or an antibody serology, every person with evidence of the virus has to have the disease. We all know, we've just talked about, essentially 99.8% of the people with the disease are actually, or with the virus, are actually healthy people and have no disease. So it doesn't satisfy Koch's postulates of infection being a causative agent for disease. SARS-CoV-2 does not cause COVID-19. Yes, we know lots of people that are sick with comorbidities, other inflammatory diseases. We've turned on a fire with something in these people, but it's not a coronavirus.
So Charlie, watch out on this point, because we clearly concur on the fact that if you are found to be positive, you have not to panic in any ways, because you have 90% chances of having nothing at all, just to be PCR positive. So, relax.
And maybe before Charlie, maybe I could just jump in. There's kind of two interesting things from Ireland. One is that our HSE, our health service executive, they test for coronaviruses, right? And so they, that the common cold is a coronavirus, but they report, the government and the departments of health are reporting the results as COVID-19 disease, right? So they're not the same, okay? And also recently at some of our committees, they're saying the cycles they use in Ireland for PCR is like 35 to 45 cycles, which means essentially, it may not be specific at all, the test. And then just one very interesting thing that I started because I wanted to know really from the government, in Ireland, they're reporting 1,780 deaths from COVID-19 in Ireland. So I started a process with a group of people to write to the government agencies and the doctors and the coroners, because if you write something as a cause of death, that actually has legal implications for doctors and coroners and for the individual people in the Central Statistics Office and the register of deaths, because obviously if you falsely report a death, that can actually be counted as a statistic. And then that can be used in general, but that information has to be correct. And if the doctors or coroners misreport that in Ireland, the doctors can be struck off and the coroners can be go to prison, and there's crimes of malfeasance in public office, especially if our prime ministers and people in power are making policy decisions based on information. So we have been writing that for many months. And so we've managed the number of deaths now from COVID-19 in Ireland for December, January, February, March, up to April, beginning of April in Ireland is 0 from COVID-19, because we were informing these people that they were individually held to account. And of course, if it's from COVID-19, the coroners should have done autopsies, and oftentimes they didn't. So we're now working on, in Ireland, there's about 98 deaths between April and September from COVID-19, but the government websites are reporting, 10 times more, 20 times more,
Now, Charlie, this is preoccupying. For instance, what Dolores is saying is actually taking place in France. Police has gone into the home of our former Ministry of Health, our current Ministry of Health, our former Prime Minister. So this is becoming serious as to, you know, sort of strangling around the responsibilities of at different levels.
Yeah, so just for, I suppose that people mightn't be aware, for in Ireland and in the UK, you know, if a prime minister or a minister is involved in false reporting or misinformation or malpractice, you know, because a lot of the PCR tests are actually, you know, it's a waste of public money and it's unnecessary. So they can be held personally accountable, and it's up to 5 years in prison. It's misconduct in public office or 10 years in prison. So, you know, I'm working with Rainer, you know, with lawyers all around the world, including Rainer Fulmick, you know, and I know Rocco Gelati, and I've been in touch with Lawyers for Liberty in the UK. And I'm an expert witness with Simon Dolan on his cases. So I suppose what we need to remind people is their doctors, if they are falsely reporting COVID-19, or even civil servants or health workers, you know, and people coming out in these like committees advising the government all around the world, that they are falsely, you know, creating fear and falsely exaggerating the deaths from COVID-19 based on PCR tests that would not stand up to scrutiny, in my opinion. So they will be held to account, those doctors and people advising governments and the people in government. And in Ireland, we just have a lockdown now for another 6 weeks from tonight in October, and there's no need for it at all.
Thank you, Dolores from Ireland, and then thank you, Alexandra from France, and thank you, Judy from the USA. And the world is coming together with you, and we will look forward to sharing this video with the world, and we'll come back again for another great session.
Thank you, Charlie.
Bye-bye, Charlie.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Judy. Bye-bye, Alex.
Bye-bye, Charlie.